can't hear the yellow mic.
Try it now.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
It will now.
Have hoped to have the suspect apprehended by the end of this week.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Friday, May 10th. I'm Safira Mahdi.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield. New York lawmakers are fighting over the future of the SHSAT. That's the admissions test for the city's elite high schools.
There are 250,000 untested rape kits in the US. What testing rape kits means for survivors of sexual assault?
It represents a voice of the victim saying, you know what, this is the worst day that I had, but I'm going to get the last say.
Plus, the social media platform Instagram is testing a new design, hiding likes on posts, which could disrupt the Instagram influencer industry. But not everyone's worried about the change.
Maybe if likes weren't there, more people would actually follow you for you, and not because someone else is following you, or not because this account's famous, I have to follow it.
Also, Uber enters the stock market today. What that means for the ride-sharing company's future?
All of that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Still no breakthrough that ends the U.S.-China trade dispute. But President Donald Trump tweets the last couple of days of talks between the two sides have been candid and constructive. He says the higher tariffs he imposed on Chinese goods, quote, may or may not be removed depending on what happens with respect to future negotiations. Meanwhile, the administration is attempting to reassure American farmers that they will be buffered from the financial impact of the tariff hike. As Quinn Kleinfelter of member station WDET tells us, some members of the Senate say they fear farmers will be forced to pay higher prices at a time when they can least afford it.
President Trump is imposing 25% tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. He says China is reneging on agreements it had already committed to. China vows to retaliate. But the ranking Democrat on the Senate Agriculture Committee, Michigan's Debbie Stabenow, says U.S. farmers are literally paying the price for the ongoing trade war.
We sell soybeans to China, and our farmers are hurting. They've lost markets, not only with China, but Mexico. There's issues with Canada. So what I don't see is a strategic plan.
Trump tweeted that his administration will buy U.S. agricultural products in, quote, larger amounts than China ever did and use them for humanitarian aid. For NPR News, I'm Quinn Kleinfelter in Detroit.
4 wreaths of white flowers rest on a chain-link fence outside a heavily damaged silicone plant in Waukegan, Illinois, north of Chicago. They are tributes to the 4 men who were killed in an explosion 1 week ago. Today, relatives, friends, and area residents like Dustin Aselman attended the memorial.
It's the first time actually I've been past this building since the explosion, and it's just insane once you get up close to it and seeing people's tears and lives lost. It's heartbreaking.
Police are still investigating the cause of the explosion. The ride-hailing giant Uber is officially now a publicly traded company, and the road is not without a few bumps. NPR's Camilla Dominowski reports that after its highly anticipated IPO this morning, shares are now down about 7.6% at $41.57.
Uber's launch on the New York Stock Exchange started on a down note. After a few hours' delay, shares began trading at 6% under their initial price, which was already at the low end of Uber's possible range. Skeptics have raised questions about Uber's future. The company has grown enormously, but has yet to turn a profit. CEO Dara Khosrowshahi says that Uber's investors are in it for the long haul. He spoke to CNBC shortly before the debut.
We're going to be measuring success in 3 to 5 to 10 years, not in one day.
Uber raised $8 billion in this IPO, money it needs to subsidize its ride-hailing and other services. Camila Dominowski, NPR News.
This is NPR.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Shannon Lin. The ride-hailing service Uber officially went public this morning on Wall Street. Uber's main rival Lyft went public 6 weeks ago. Later in the broadcast, we'll have more from an analyst on Uber's long-term profitability. Earlier this week, Uber and Lyft drivers staged protests in major cities across the nation, including New York, to highlight unfair treatment of workers. New York State is on track to phase out its last remaining coal-fired power plants by the end of 2020. The state's Department of Environmental Conservation says it will now require all power plants in the state to meet new emission limits for carbon dioxide. The regulations on carbon emissions are the first of its kind in the nation. There have been 3 reported attacks in Morningside Park in the past 2 weeks. The robberies were allegedly committed by a group of young people ranging from the age of 12 to 15, according to Captain Anudi Castillo of the 26th Precinct in West Harlem. Castillo has said that the police had hoped to have the suspects apprehended by the end of the week. Anna Sorokin, better known as the Soho grifter, was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in prison on Thursday. Sorokin spent nearly a year pretending to be a Manhattan socialite, swindling out of over $250,000 from businesses, banks, and people. She was also ordered to pay nearly $200,000 in restitution and a fine of $24,000. Bronx Week kicked off on Thursday with a celebration of some of the borough's oldest residents. Around 50 trophies were handed to attendees over 95 years old, and 17 were awarded to those over 100. Bronx Week, which celebrates residents and local businesses, will continue until May 19th. It's warm today with highs of 73 and chances of scattered thunderstorms later in the evening. Temperatures will cool down to the high 60s on Saturday and mid-50s on Sunday, with a chance of scattered showers. From Columbia Radio News, I'm Shannon Lin.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Hannah Critchfield.
And I'm Safira Mahdi. Today, Uber made its debut on the New York Stock Exchange at $42 per share. That's $3 lower than the company's initial public offering, which was announced yesterday. The ride-sharing app, which many New Yorkers rely on, is valued at $82.4 billion. But while Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi has promised a futuristic vision in line with the likes of Amazon, the company continues to operate at a loss, and it's unclear whether investors will feel optimistic about its future. I talked with Tom White, a senior research analyst at D.A. Davidson, about Uber's path to profitability and its rivalry with ride-hailing service Lyft. Tom White, senior research analyst at D.A. Davidson, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It seems that, Uber has learned some lessons from its rival by, not going too crazy with its valuation, which now sits around, I think, $82 billion. But, Lyft and Uber are essentially now going head-to-head. How is this sort of expected to play out? Is it too early to predict a winner?
Look, I think, as far as the businesses, Uber is clearly the number one market share player in U.S. ride-sharing. But Lyft has become a stronger and stronger number two over the last 2 years. They've steadily gained share at the expense of Uber in North America. So, it's probably too early to call that battle long term. Generally, we think Uber's going to be able to maintain their category-leading position just due to their scale and the extent of their resources. As far as the battle for the stocks, Uber is unique to Lyft in that it does offer investors exposure to not just U.S. ride-sharing, but a lot of other global markets for ride-sharing, as well as online food delivery in today over 500 cities, and in the near term, we think close to 700 cities.
And sort of just sticking to this idea of sort of Uber's path to profitability, when do we think that Uber will be able to start giving an indication on its profit? Earlier, and I think it was in April, Uber released its own financial results, and it shows that they suffered $1 billion loss this year in its first quarter alone. Is that something that Uber will be able to give an indication on anytime soon, or is that sort of asking a little too much?
Well, it's interesting. They've been a bit vague on giving a precise timeline for profitability. The interesting thing, though, is that they, in a lot of ways, some of the levers that can get them to profitability are a bit under their control. For example, in 2018, their core business of ride-sharing and Uber Eats actually was profitable on an adjusted basis, which basically excludes a lot of the investments that they were making in autonomous driving technology and some other kind of non-core expenses. But in order to do that, Uber had to really kind of pull back some of their growth investments. So there was an impact on growth as a result of getting to profitability. The way that Uber's talking, it seems like they very much want to lean into growth right now. They want to gain as much market share as they can. They want to sort of cement their long-term leadership position. And for them to do that, we anticipate it's going to push off, any meaningful profitability for at least 5 years.
And also, just sticking to this, one sort of final question on this profitability side. I mean, some are predicting that one thing that they could do is increase rider prices. And I mean, if we take New York, for example, Uber is widely used across the city. I think there was a report last year that even said that half of New Yorkers were replacing subway rides with Uber. I mean, is this something that is probably a little bit more imminent?
I think it's going to be kind of a dynamic thing that both of the companies are sort of monitoring and trying to manage in real time, optimizing for the highest prices that they can get out of riders without, having massive impacts on their growth rate or market share. But, given that these are digital platforms, it'll be very fluid, I think, kind of the pricing dynamic on a city-by-city basis.
Tom White, Senior Research Analyst at D.A. Davidson, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Uber's stock prices fluctuated throughout the day, closing at $41.57, a drop of over 7% from its initial public offering. Humans have been making roads for thousands of years. About 150 years ago, we settled on one technology for most of our streets: asphalt. But there's a problem with asphalt. It's not weather resistant. Harsh New York City winters leave roads battered, cracked, and full of potholes every year.
And the city pays hundreds of millions of dollars to repave them. Maggie Green asked engineers if there's a better way to tackle this problem.
Staten Island has a lot of potholes. Alyssa Facillo drives on the island every day, and she's gotten pretty good at dodging them.
It looked like a really big pothole right there.
Back in 2014, she learned that lesson the hard way. She was driving the same route home from a friend's house and found herself winding down Arthur Kill Road on the west side of the island.
At the time, I didn't really know where I was going. I kind of got lost.
Facillo hit a pothole. Hard. Her car started to swerve.
It was kind of scary. It moved in a certain way that I was like, oh my God, I have no control of the car.
She skidded to a stop further up the road. She was okay, but her car wasn't. The tire had popped, and her car's undercarriage was wrecked. Today, there's a big patch in the road where she says the pothole was, and a new pothole just up the street. The year of her crash, New York had a particularly bad winter, and the city repaired over 400,000 potholes. Lucius Riccio was a transportation commissioner in the 1980s, but today he's an engineer and teaches at Columbia and New York University. Instead of just repaving potholes, Riccio says until recently, the city wasn't looking hard enough at the underlying causes.
But that's like coming across 300,000 or 400,000 dead cows and being proud of the great job you did burying them, without ever asking the question, why are there 300,000 or 400,000 dead cows in the first place?
But Riccio says asphalt is ultimately an engineering problem. It warps and morphs depending on its age and the outside temperature. And to make asphalt better, you have to look at its chemistry and physics. It's made up of a binder, a kind of black tar, an aggregate, or rocks and sand. And the way those components interact can make or break the asphalt mix. Jo Sias is an engineer at the University of New Hampshire. She says you can think of asphalt like silly putty.
When you first play with it, it's stiffer, but then as the heat from your hands warms it up, it gets softer. And if you put it in the freezer, it gets very brittle and you can actually just shatter it.
And that cycle happens every year. Water seeps into the asphalt when it rains or snows, then freezes when the temperature drops. Once the temperature rises, the ice thaws, leaving behind an empty space for a pothole to form. But continually patching up potholes weakens the asphalt in the long term.
So it's not just about, when a pavement gets to be in bad shape, just putting Band-Aids on it.
Sias says asphalt itself is a more or less mature technology. There are minor chemical tweaks you can make to an asphalt mix to make it more temperature or age resistant, but ultimately, the secret is to just keep on paving roads.
If you don't maintain them, you're not going to get the extent of the life as you could. But you do have to spend the money to do the maintenance.
But researchers are now exploring new technology for road surfaces that might keep potholes from forming in the first place. Huiming Yin is a professor in the civil engineering department at Columbia University. He's like a mad scientist of asphalt.
I like to drive on the new asphalt pavement. I love asphalt. Yeah.
His research lab is full of construction materials and test gear. On one wall is a machine that kind of looks like a giant microwave oven. It's big enough to stress test asphalt by sending it through freezing and warming cycles.
Yeah, we can put the asphalt inside, then we can have the airflow, then can make the material change with the temperature and with the time.
These days, his research focuses on self-heating and cooling roads.
We invent a kind of structure I call it as a geothermal heat wheel.
What he calls a geothermal heat wheel is a way of regulating temperature. Yin imagines a street built like the blood vessels under your skin that keep you warm, a system of pumps filled with a flowing liquid just under the street surface that can heat streets in the winter. In the summer, the liquid pulls heat away from the street surface, cooling down the road. That warmer liquid is then stored underground until the winter, when it's pushed back up.
I can use a heat pump to heat up the liquid. For example, I heat up to 25 degrees Celsius and make the surface become warmer.
Because the roads wouldn't freeze in the winter, Yin's heat wheel would make the streets last a lot longer. But the whole system would also be a lot more expensive, about 10 times as much as traditional asphalt by Yin's estimate. Bob Mayer is the Director of Operations at the Department of Transportation. He says instead of replacing the whole system, the city is focusing on making the process as environmentally friendly as possible. One way is by recycling asphalt.
And producing asphalt at lower energy levels with less emissions.
The city is focusing on repurposing older asphalt plants to be able to take old asphalt pulled from city streets and reintroduce it into a new mix. This way, the city doesn't have to truck in new materials to make a brand new batch every time a street is resurfaced.
Which will basically make it more emissions friendly and be more energy efficient.
Riccio, the former transportation commissioner, says it's important to keep making environmentally conscious innovations, even if the process of maintaining roads stays the same.
Right now, the best way is resurfacing. It's not cheap, it's not glamorous.
Sorry for the minor We're having some minor technical difficulties.
Stay with us. We'll be back soon. Warning to our listeners, the following story discusses sexual assault.
DNA evidence collected after a sexual assault is known as a rape kit. Rape kits are supposed to be tested immediately. When they aren't, it creates a backlog. New York City was one of the first cities to clear its backlog in 2003.
But nationally, 250,000 rape kits sit in storage, waiting to be tested. Stephanie Horton reports on the stories behind these rape kits.
While walking back to her apartment in 1993, then 20-year-old Natasha Alexenko was raped at gunpoint. After the assault, she went to the hospital and a nurse collected evidence. This exam is commonly known as a rape kit. It involves swabs of every orifice, and it can take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours.
It's really an invasive experience. So after you've gone through this horrible assault, you once again have to kind of be invaded, for lack of a better word.
After Alexenko got the exam, she went home. She had no idea her rape kit would sit in storage at the NYPD for 9 years.
I had no reason to believe that they would put me through that ordeal and then not do anything with the kit. It just didn't even enter my mind.
Alexenko's kit wasn't tested immediately, but it was eventually tested. They didn't have a suspect, they had DNA evidence. In cases like that, they can indict the DNA profile, meaning if the man who assaulted Alexenko was found, he could be charged with rape.
He assaulted a police officer in Las Vegas soon after the indictment and sentenced to 44 to 107 years in prison. Alexenko's story of her attacker being convicted is the exception.
I think about everything he did, all the people he hurt, and I think about the fact that we could have caught him sooner, and, it just breaks my heart.
Today in New York, kits are tested immediately by criminalists such as Jocelyn Costello. She works at the office of the chief medical examiner. She explains what goes into extracting DNA evidence.
So all the envelopes are marked what orifice they come from. So I'm going to grab the first one. So this one.
Costello is sporting a white lab coat and purple latex gloves. She stands next to a table covered in 12 white envelopes and picks one up.
We'll actually swab the inner cheeks.
Costello drags out the long cotton swab from one of the envelopes. Each one is clearly marked with the name of an orifice: vaginal, anal, buccal, and fingernail scrapings, just to name a few. Costello says it takes an average of 2 weeks to process a rape kit, and according to city reports, up to $1,500. Even with all of this work, most rape kits don't even yield a DNA profile. But they are one more step in trying to convict a sex crime. Costello teaches young, aspiring criminalists how to process DNA in this very lab. She says it's important to remind her students what those kits represent.
It represents a voice. It represents a voice of the victim saying, you know what, this is the worst day that I had, but I'm going to get the last say.
But in many places across the U.S., that voice goes silent, which is why ending the nationwide backlog has been the main goal of groups advocating for the rights of sexual assault victims. Ilse Knecht is the advocacy director of the Joyful Heart Foundation, a group pushing to end the backlog.
For survivors who leave the hospital after an exam, most of them never hear again where their kid is. Even if they try to find out, they reach a dead end most of the time.
Knecht says these long silences can impact a survivor's mental health.
I have actually had conversations with a couple survivors who said, when I didn't hear what happened, they blamed themselves. They thought maybe I wasn't a good enough witness.
Even though New York City cleared out its rape kits in 2003, nationally, an estimated 250,000 sit untested, which is why in 2015, Manhattan DA Cy Vance Jr. pledged $38 million to help clear the national backlog. Over the 4-year span, they have funded the testing of 55,000 rape kits across the U.S., but it has only led to 56 convictions. Alexenko says every conviction matters.
And I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but to the survivors, that's like so much. Even one arrest, even putting one person's mind at ease is worth it.
Alexenko says the backlog is just a symptom of a larger issue. She thinks talking about these issues is the first step.
It's a crime that's not taken seriously. It's a crime we don't want to talk about openly. It's a crime that we've only started feeling comfortable enough to share the details of.
Recently, more survivors do feel comfortable sharing the details of their attacks. But these rape kits represent only a fraction of sexual assault survivors. Stephanie Horton, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Safira Ahmadi.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield. PrEP is the only drug known to prevent HIV, and only one version of it has been on the market. It's called Truvada. But earlier this week, Truvada's manufacturer, Gilead Sciences, announced it would allow another company, Teva, to produce it as a generic medication starting in 2020. I spoke to Christopher Morton, a patent lawyer at the Global Health Justice Partnership at Yale Law School, about what a little competition might mean for customers. As a disclaimer, Morton used to work for a law firm that has represented Teva in the past, but was not involved in this specific case. Morton, thanks for joining us. A few years ago, Rick was cooking crabs in the kitchen at the Steamer, a seafood restaurant in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
I'm so sorry we're experiencing technical difficulties again. If you could please hold with us, we'll be back with you shortly.
Thanks so much. So just to get started, could you put this into context for us? This new generic version of Truvada, also known as PrEP, is going to enter the market in a year. Where are we at now? What's currently available?
Yeah, right now, Truvada remains a very expensive product on which Gilead holds a monopoly.
What's Gilead?
Gilead is Gilead Sciences Incorporated. It's a major brand name pharmaceutical company based in the United States. I think in large part as a result of the price that Gilead charges, which is currently about $20,000 a year, we have a situation in the United States where a lot of folks who want to take PrEP certainly would benefit from PrEP. Only about 10 to 20% of those people actually today receive PrEP or have prescriptions for PrEP.
Why is it at that cost? Is it due to how much it costs to make?
It's definitely not due to how much it costs to make. There are generics overseas that make generic versions of PrEP for, I think, less than $60 a year. So the pills are really cheap to manufacture. But in the United States, Gilead can charge basically any price that it wants because it has patent rights. And we in the United States, at least right now, don't have any negotiating power on brand name drug prices. So in general, when a brand name drug company sets a price, whether it's $1,000 or $50,000, sort of we, the people, pay that price, whether through private or through public insurance.
For New Yorkers who are currently in that 80% of people not receiving the care that they could benefit from, how will this generic PrEP possibly change their experience?
I'm not sure it's going to make a huge difference. We have yet to see. I'll say, first off, the fact that if Teva introduces a generic version in September 2020, prices are unlikely to come way, way down, at least right away. It typically takes a year or two or three or four, and it takes multiple generic competitors, not just one, to really drive prices down. Teva will definitely sell a cheaper version, but it won't necessarily sell a much cheaper version. We'll have to see.
Is there any reasonable time frame, or can we expect those new drugs to enter the market anytime soon?
I think it's September of 2021 is when the last of Gilead's patent rights that it's currently using to keep generics off the market are expected to expire. So I would think by September 2021, at latest, there will be more generic entrants beyond just Teva.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
In this piece from our commentary series, Sophia Amati talks about the difficulties of growing up in a skin she thought she'd never shed.
When I was younger, I would often look in the mirror and see a red, puffy face staring back. I would often think this was it. The redness and inflammation that had taken hostage of my face was never going to let me go. The rashes and swelling on my body would become a permanent feature that I would never get to grow out of, unlike a bad childhood haircut. I had small rashes as a baby, but was only diagnosed with chronic eczema around the age of 3. By then, it had spread everywhere. My legs, the backs of my knees, my wrists. Worst of all, the skin around my mouth and jaw was red raw. During flare-ups, it would burn so intensely, it felt like I was sitting next to an open fire. At night when I was little, I would scratch myself in my sleep. My mum would wrap me in head-to-toe cotton, even little cotton gloves just to stop me. To mask the itch, I would clench my fist tight and dig my nails into the palms of my hands. My mum tried everything to make it better. Acupuncture, alternative medicine, and countless specialists that all seemed to share the same prescription: topical steroids. But they would just thin my already raw skin, and as soon as I stopped applying the creams, the condition got worse. Most types of eczema are related to allergies, and I had many. Dust, plants, pollen, animal hair, washing powder, and so many different types of food. Dairy really brought it out, and cow's milk was eventually replaced with goats. Chocolates and sweets were banned from our house entirely. If I had sugar, a red mark on my left cheek would light up like a lightning bolt. Many of the things children take for granted I couldn't do. I couldn't play with my friends' pets, let alone my own. I couldn't swim at school because the chlorine would make my skin itch even more. I couldn't sit with my friends in the grass on long, hot summer days. We couldn't even have a Christmas tree because it would make my eyes water before I'd even entered the room. I would come home from school and tell my mum that people always stared, and other kids would make comments about the way I looked. My mum says I would often come home crying. Why couldn't I look normal? Why couldn't I be like the other girls at school? Why am I so ugly? I would say. I looked at my friends. They were beautiful. Except for the occasional yet fleeting spot, their skin was flawless. I would cover my mouth while talking to hide the eczema that enveloped the bottom half of my face. No boy would ever want to date me, let alone kiss me. On really bad days, I would beg my mum to let me stay at home. She never did. Years of treatment passed and nothing worked. Cream after cream and a cocktail of antihistamines just to get me through the day. Then one year my aunt had an idea. She had grown up in a small town in the centre of Portugal. Up in the mountains there was a small clinic where locals would go to treat their skin. So one summer I tried going for 3 weeks. Every day we would drive up through the mountains, an hour of undulating turns and bends. The clinic had high ceilings with bare walls and long, endless white corridors lined with doors. Behind each door was a chair for your clothes and a bath. I would spend 2 hours bathing in the water that flowed down from hot springs in the mountains. The sulfur in the water smelled so bad, you wouldn't want to stand next to it, let alone put your face in it. And the skin on my face was the worst. My mum was always sitting by my side. She'd make jokes and plead with me to submerge myself entirely. She would even bring back bottles of spring water so that she could wash my face again with it before bed. After 3 weeks, to everyone's surprise, my skin was better. So I went back for 2 more summers. Every time I returned home, the eczema would come back less and less, until one year it was eventually gone. I still had slight patches dotted around my body that would flare up on hot summer days. In extremely cold winters, it would come back around my eyes and the uppermost corner of my cheekbones. But for the most part, it was gone. When I look in the mirror today, there are no rashes on my face, just lighter patches of skin from where the steroids were applied. I'm grateful, but there's a feeling I still can't shake. Eczema is technically incurable. For the moment it lays dormant, but sometimes I worry. What if it comes back? And what if next time it stays with me for good?
Sophia has grown out of most of her allergies and now can't go a day without eating chocolate.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Safira Ahmadi.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield.
Coming up, 147 years ago today, the first female presidential candidate announced her campaign. Who was she?
Plus, how the Me Too movement is playing out in the restaurant industry.
And Instagram tests a new design.
These stories and more coming up. But first, these headlines.
From Columbia Radio News, I'm Lauren Lantry. At 12:01 this morning, the U.S. increased tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. That's a 15% increase. Economists are worried that this could trigger a financial crisis, since China is expected to retaliate. Today, U.S. and Chinese representatives sat down for a second day of negotiations, but their day finished with no breakthroughs. As earlier announced in the show, today is Uber's first day on the New York Stock Exchange. It's currently getting traded for $41.57. Sorry for that mistake. The Pentagon just approved $1.5 billion that will go to building at least 80 miles of the new barrier on the U.S. southern border. The funds were drawn from a variety of Pentagon sources, including cost savings, according to the acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan. Earlier this week, Georgia signed a bill that will ban abortions when a fetal heartbeat is detected, which can be as early as 6 weeks. A similar bill is on hold in Alabama. This afternoon, Colorado courts announced that the 2 teenagers accused of opening fire at their high school last Tuesday will be charged in court next week. They were arrested and held without bond on suspicion of a single count of first-degree murder and 29 counts of attempted murder. The victim's name was Kendra Castillo. Special counsel Robert Mueller will not testify in front of Congress next week about his investigation into the current White House administration's links to Russia. At least 50 people died when a migrant boat sunk off the coast of Tunisia, the UN Migration Agency reports today. Fishing boats were able to rescue 16 individuals. European leaders, including Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, say more must be done. Last year, over 2,000 people died or went missing in the Mediterranean Sea. From Columbia Radio News, I'm Lauren Lantry.
New York City is experiencing an opioid crisis. In 2016, over 1,000 people died of opioid overdose. That's a 70% increase from 2014. And it's not just affecting adults. According to the National Institute of Health, even high schoolers are abusing opioids.
Talking to kids about drugs can be tough, and cultural stigma can make it even harder. Reporter Cynthia Betabiza looks at how one local community is coping.
Bensonhurst is home to one of New York City's largest Arab American communities. It's the last Friday before Ramadan, and the Muslim American Society Youth Center is packed. Boys and girls of all ages are seated around a long table in the classroom. A poster of a friendly-looking cartoon character bee hangs on the wall. The kids are here to learn more about Islam, trade life advice, and just kick it.
The people that I call my friends, I would say, are mainly from the mosque. Like, they have my back, I have their back. And it's been a bond since I was younger.
Abu Bakr Al-Charfa is 15. He's in the 10th grade. He's rocking a bright blue t-shirt with a wide, braces-filled smile. Like any teenager, Al-Charfa is navigating around some tricky waters.
Partying, definitely. Drinking, tattoos, nasty. Dating and all that is so pointless.
And a big one?
Using drugs.
Al-Charfa says he feels nervous talking to his parents about that one.
If I ask my parents, I know they're gonna think of the worst. That's how our parents are. They think either I'm doing it or I know someone that they know might be doing it and they want to tell their mom.
Across the table, Omar Yahya chuckles at Al-Charfa. He's 19, in college. He says he's seen firsthand what happens when kids are afraid to talk to their parents.
One of my friends is into some drugs. It's a big issue. If you're using medications like oxycodone, Percocets, epinephrine, individuals use epinephrine. I know one individual is not only using epinephrine. I don't know where he gets epinephrine, but epinephrine is a dangerous drug. That's a drug that's for cardiac arrest.
Abuse of epinephrine is not as common as other drugs like fentanyl, Oxycontin, Percocet, and morphine, the kinds of medicines you can get with a prescription. In 2017, there were 350 overdose deaths here, and that has many parents concerned. But cultural stigma can make addressing this issue difficult. Sabrina Sahir is a social worker at the Arab American Association of New York in Bay Ridge. She picks her words carefully. She says that many parents in her community are traditional.
Word spreads in the community, but a lot of it is swept under the rug. And there have been times where if someone overdoses, they try to say that it was a heart attack and not an overdose, like they look for another medical reason.
Sahir says some parents can worry that other people will negatively judge their families if they find out that one of their own is struggling with addiction. It's a problem that can bring shame.
Because of that, we haven't had a chance to help because, there's so much stigma. They don't want people to know that their son or their daughter died because of this.
So, Sahir says she's trying to approach the subject of drug abuse as tactfully as possible. When another organization held a workshop on Narcan, a medicine that helps stop overdoses, some parents from the community spoke out against it. Sahir says this makes her hesitant to try a similar approach.
Community backlash. There's not much talk about harm reduction. It would be nice for this place to be have a needle exchange. But again, someone might voice that we are promoting drug use by doing that.
But some approaches in drug education are making headway. Mark Marroquin is with the Bayt El-Maqdis Islamic Center of Bay Ridge. He says talking about drugs in a familiar religious setting can lessen the shame. He says it's like this. If someone says they're going to a drug workshop, rumors can easily circulate about their family. But if that same person says they're going to an event at the mosque, there's nothing suspicious or out of place about that. So, he helped organize a special iftar, a daily breaking of the fasting Ramadan, last spring. He says community members came and they talked.
Issues with their children, such as the influences of drugs, marijuana, opioids, and they wanted to talk about how they can combat this, these issues with their children.
Wiam Al-Rubai moved here from Iraq with her husband and 4 kids 5 years ago. She's familiar with the stigma that can come with talking about drugs.
The community is so small, and they think maybe anyone heard about that. They blame their parents, how they can not to protect them.
But Al-Rubai wants to talk. Her youngest daughter is a senior at Fort Hamilton High School. She told her mom sometimes she sees people doing opioids outside of her school. That's why Al-Rubai wants more of the conversation to happen at schools.
I think if the school always make meeting between the parents and between them, not just for every 3 months, or try to do it every 2 months, and discuss their problems with their parents and how they can solve them.
Parents like her have taken action. And now, age-appropriate education on opioid addiction will be included in public school curriculum, starting in the fall of this year. As for 15-year-old Abu Bakar Al-Charfa, he's already found his solution. He saw other kids at his school doing drugs, so he switched schools.
Peer pressure is not a thing. If I don't want to go, no one's going to force me to do it. And there's no way someone's going to be like, oh, it's cool, it's fun. It's not.
Sabrina Zahir, the social worker with the Arab American Association of New York, says she's starting to plan events on opioids. Slowly. Cynthia Betibiza, Columbia Radio News.
To find charts and more data on New York City's opioid crisis, head to uptownradio.org. Parolees who just came out of jail have to pay a fee of $30 per month. That might not seem like a lot of money, but for some people it means having not being able to pay for food or rent.
Shannon Lin looks at how these fees can follow people for months and even years after their case is resolved.
It's noon, and Marvin Mayfield is standing on the corner of Lexington Avenue and 18th Street in East Harlem. He's trying to decide the cheapest possible option for lunch. It's his first meal of the day.
If I have a couple of bucks, I usually go to a Chinese restaurant across the street, or when it's a really bad day, no money, I will walk down to the dollar store and pick up one of those frozen things and throw it in the microwave. And that's pretty much what I was going to do today.
Since coming out of prison 2 years ago, Mayfield is required to pay a monthly fee to New York State's Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. It's a fee meant to cover the cost of his parole. Mayfield has struggled to pay for essentials like food and rent, but he says he'd rather miss a few meals than lose his freedom.
I'd pay the $30 in a heartbeat rather than go to prison, even if it meant that I didn't eat that day or that week, whatever. I wouldn't do it. I would pay it, absolutely.
Mayfield only pays for his parole. It's one of the many fines and fees that people in the criminal justice system have to pay. There's a supervision fee while in prison. That's $1 a week. If convicted of a felony, there's a surcharge of $300. If you have a DWI, there's a monthly $30 fee. And if a person can't pay, their debt only grows with more late fines. Joanna Weiss is the director of the nonprofit Fines and Fees Justice Center. She says that all these fines and fees are imposed at a time when people are most vulnerable.
Creating these kinds of barriers to successful reentry is really counterproductive. We don't want people, especially poor people, cycling constantly through the system.
For people on parole, failure to pay the supervision fee is a mark against them getting early release from parole. Last month, Marvin Mayfield was eligible for possible early release, but he was denied. His parole officer told him it was because he had consistently missed his payments.
I just don't understand. It really doesn't make sense. Why would you keep a person on parole because I can't pay $30?
According to a 2016 court case, the state's Court of Appeals justifies these fines and fees not as punishment, but as a form of revenue for the state. Chris Hartney is a senior researcher at the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. He says the amount of revenue generated is insignificant compared to the cost of maintaining parole.
Parole is expensive to the state for sure. They don't make money off of it by any stretch, and the fees that are charged don't offset all of the cost.
But still, Joanna Weiss says that every jurisdiction from the state, county to the city level has struggled with how to pay for the mass incarceration system.
They've come up with a scheme of trying to charge the system back to the people going through it. And that's where fees come up. Fees, costs, surcharges. These are all costs of any kind of way that you might touch the criminal justice system.
Here's how it breaks down. In the New York metropolitan area, fines and fees brought in over $30 million in 2013. The city and state split this amount. According to a 2016 report released by the city's criminal courts, this money went to the operational cost of the unified court system. Bianca Tylik is the director of the nonprofit Worth Rises. She says that the costs of the criminal justice system should not be passed on to people who are economically distressed and vulnerable.
These are government functions that the government should be funding, and not necessarily on the backs of folks who are trying to positively move into society.
At the state level, the Democratic majority has put broader criminal justice reform at the forefront of the legislative agenda. Last month, Governor Cuomo and the state Democrats introduced a package of bills reforming bail and parole laws, though nothing yet related to fines and fees. At the city level, council members are taking steps to understand issues stemming from monetary penalties. Several hearings regarding the cost of criminal justice have been held since last October. In April, City Council passed bills eliminating fees on bail payments. Councilman Keith Powers serves as the chair of the council's Criminal Justice Committee. He says overhauling monetary penalties is an issue the council needs more time to explore in depth.
And are we adding financial costs to people who really may have financial difficulty because of being disconnected from their life, losing a job, and all stuff? And so can we reevaluate those and look at either lowering the cost of them or eliminating them?
But some politicians, like Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara, worry that the recent criminal justice reforms will lead to an increase in crime.
I just don't believe if you get rid of all these laws that people are going to stop doing these things wrong. I mean, the reason we made the laws in the first place is because people are doing them wrong, and we're trying to hold them accountable.
Back in East Harlem, Marvin Mayfield has a year left of parole after being denied for early release. He's hoping that by this time next year, he'll be free from the system.
Hopefully, at some point in time, things will get better, my finances will get better, and I'll be able to make these payments. But right now, it's like, if I spent that money, I would have nothing else for anything else.
Mayfield is currently enrolled at Columbia University in the Justice in Education program. After he finishes in 3 years, he hopes to become a full-time community organizer. He says he wants to help reform the criminal justice system so that others don't have to be trapped by the same fees that trapped him. Shannon Lynn, Columbia Radio News.
There are about 1.5 million undocumented immigrants living in New York City. Many of them come here legally and overstay their visas. One of these visas, the J-1. It's intended to be a cultural exchange visa, almost like a study abroad program. As Hannah Critchfield reports, migrant advocates say the J-1 is being abused.
A few years ago, Rick was cooking crabs in the kitchen at the Steamer, a seafood restaurant in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
I'm kind of new to that because I'm not a cook. So I just took it just to make sure that I can sustain all my needs.
Rick had never been a chef before. Back in the Philippines, he majored in business administration. I'm only using Rick's first name. That's because he's worried he'll be deported. Rick is undocumented. But he originally came here legally on a J-1 visa.
Labor trafficking is interesting because it is all happening legally until it's not, right?
Jackie Mariano is a lawyer with Mission to End Modern Slavery. She works with trafficking survivors. And about 2 years ago, she started noticing an increase in survivors who had had J-1 visas.
The workers are entering the United States through these legal guest worker visas, and now this J-1 visa.
The J-1 was created back in the Cold War by Senator Fulbright. It was intended to increase cultural understanding between the U.S. and other countries. But advocates for migrant workers say the visa is being used by employers to get cheap labor, not for cultural exchange. Jeremy McLean is a lawyer with Justice in Motion, a nonprofit which represents exploited migrant workers.
It's really interesting when you look at the list of employers that use J-1s.
The top 3 employers of J-1 visas in 2015: Walt Disney, Cedar Fair Amusement Parks, and McDonald's.
I suppose flipping hamburgers at McDonald's is part of the American culture, but that's not... Most advocates think that's not the original design and purpose of the program. It's supposed to be a bunch of kids coming over for a summer vacation, and it's just not like that.
According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, many J-1 visa participants end up working low-wage service jobs, as cashiers at restaurants or cleaners at hotels. That's what happened to Rick. His time in the U.S. started in Texas, selling roller coaster photos at Six Flags. McLean says this happens because there's a loophole. The J-1 isn't considered a work program, so employers don't have to pay J-1 holders minimum wage, which makes them very attractive employees.
If they can't fulfill their cheap, unskilled labor needs with the H-2B program, then they'll go over to J-1s.
But even so, Rick was still making more than he could back home in the Philippines. Money he could send back to his mother and siblings.
I'm the youngest in the family, but then I'm the only one who's here who can help them financially, yeah.
His visa was for 8 months, so when his time at Six Flags was about to expire, Rick started looking for a new employer to sponsor him. He found Regal Hospitality Services on Google. Rick says a man named Arthur Gregorian at Regal promised they could switch him over to another kind of temporary visa, an H-2B, which would allow him to work in the U.S. for another year. He showed Rick a receipt of the visa application, sent in Rick's name, to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
I saw my name, so I thought it was legit.
And that's when things went downhill quickly. Regal sent him to Alabama, and because he believed a replacement visa was on the way, Rick overstayed his J-1 visa. Once there, Regal assigned him 14-hour workdays at 3 different seafood restaurants, 6 days a week.
Normally, I started working like 9:30 a.m. until 12 midnight. How many hours? Like 14 and a half.
Another critique of the J-1 program, it's used for human trafficking. Human trafficking isn't just sex trafficking. According to the State Department, it's also obtaining a person for labor through use of force, fraud, or coercion.
It's not people being physically abducted and drugged 24/7 so that they cannot escape. That happens. But in large part, trafficking and exploitation cases involve psychological elements to keep people in a state of exploitation.
Jeremy McLean again. He says in the case of J-1 workers like Rick, it often involves fear of deportation. Rick's employer Regal set up his housing in an apartment building with about 60 other J-1 holders, all employed by the company. They provided his transportation to work. He says they charged him for both, at double the average rent price for a shared bedroom in the area. And they were the ones who had applied for a visa on his behalf.
Once you tie a person's legal status to be in the country to their employment, that's an incredible amount of leverage that an employer can exert on a worker.
McLean says trafficking of J-1 holders is really hard to track. That's because the State Department has just 13 compliance officers to oversee 350,000 J-1 participants, who are scattered across every state in America. One day, Gregorian gathered the 60 J-1 holders living there. Rick says, like him, they'd also been depending on Gregorian to get them new visas. But he told them their H-2B applications had been denied. They could no longer go to work, and if they wanted to leave their apartments, they would have to text Gregorian for permission.
He will text us, he will call us if he's outside. But if someone's knock on our door, don't open it. We're just wondering. So, we're just assuming that the agency is doing illegal something. So
Rick fled a week later, without a job and without documented status. Arthur Gregorian would not agree to a recorded interview, but he did say via phone that Regal Hospitality only hires workers with J-1 visas. They would never promise an employee an H-2B visa. But emails corroborate Rick's story, suggesting Arthur hired Rick directly, even though his J-1 visa was about to expire. Undocumented, Rick went to New York. Friends told him he could find work, and that's how Rick ended up in New York City.
To be honest, I don't want to be like illegal worker here. But then, after that H-2B, I don't have any choice.
Both Mariano from Mission to End Modern Slavery and McLean from Justice in Motion say tracking the number of undocumented workers like Rick, who began their time as J-1 visa holders but became victims of trafficking through fraud, is tough. They're afraid to seek help. And because the program's considered a cultural exchange, not a work program, there's a lack of government oversight. The State Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Today, Rick is blending smoothies at Jamba Juice. He hopes to apply for a trafficking visa, but for now says he's too busy. He's still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Hannah Critchfield, Columbia Radio News. Me Too movement has brought changes to the food industry. Celebrity chefs, including Mario Batali, have been accused of sexual harassment. In some cases, they've been forced out of their businesses.
But according to a recent study, the food service business as a whole still has the highest number of sexual harassment cases of any industry in the country. And as Lauren Lantry finds, many believe there's still a lot more to be done.
Behind the scenes of a restaurant, jobs are specifically defined and strictly enforced. The chef, which means chief in French, is in command. In a kitchen, you'll hear oui chef or yes chef, not really no chef. And these roles in kitchens haven't changed in centuries. Nadia Hevka is a supervising attorney at Community Legal Services. She represents restaurant workers who have been harassed by a customer, a coworker, or a manager. Hevka says that this rigid hierarchy allows for sexual harassment.
It's not a sexual thing, it's a power thing. It's like, I can cross this line on the job and you can't do anything about it.
And when workers are harassed, they often have nowhere to turn.
Restaurant workers have to figure out what to do on their own. They don't have a union to go to.
Workers who complain about sexual harassment are in a particularly vulnerable position.
Kalpana Krishnamarthi works at Forward Together, an organization that helps win rights for disenfranchised people and communities. She says employees reporting sexual harassment might also face reprisals from their bosses.
Are they going to get good shifts after they complain? Are they going to get any shifts? Are they going to get fired? So we've created a condition in which workers have to assess how much can I put up with this behavior in order to get the shifts I need to pay for my family.
The restaurant industry is the second largest employer in the United States. Over 13 million people work in the industry. Saru Jayaraman is the co-founder and president of the Restaurant Opportunities Centers United. They help restaurant workers find safer jobs and fairer wages. She says in the front of the house, waiters, busboys, and hostesses work mostly for tips, and that creates another space for harassment.
And a woman called in and she said, I'd have to go into the kitchen and show my breast to the kitchen staff to get them to make the meal just as I need it to please the customers to get the tip.
And sexual harassment happens at all levels of the restaurant industry, even at the very high end.
My roommate brought home some lamb neck, and I had a hankering for ragu, even though I've never made it before.
Oh, that's awesome.
Katie Yoon is at home in her kitchen, making a lamb and pork ragu. It's a dark red-brown color. It's got a hint of cinnamon and a lot of red wine. Tonight, she's cooking dinner for a friend. But she used to work at 11 Madison Park, which is now ranked the 4th best restaurant in the world, according to the team at the world's 50 best restaurants. And she said she learned a lot there.
I'm grateful what it taught me. It taught me a lot about what fine dining means, and it reshaped about how I think food should look and taste.
Despite learning so much about food at the restaurant, she left her job. She says working there was unbearable. Her coworkers kept mistaking her for another female Asian employee. Her managers would make racist remarks about guests. One of her bosses used the F word, the slur to insult gay people. One day, she recalls, she was chatting with a supervisor.
We were talking about Stonewall Inn and how I had gone earlier that week, and I was like, oh, I didn't feel gay enough. And she said, well, you should go with me and we can go upstairs in the dark corner and then you'd feel gay enough.
Yoon said she was so shocked, she became silent. Later, she did tell a manager, but nothing happened. She says over the course of a year, she talked to her manager 13 times about various sexual harassment instances. Finally, 3 months ago, she quit. On her last day, she confronted her supervisor, who responded with a joke about oral sex.
And they claim to be higher in standards for a lot of things, including their kitchen culture. But at the end of the day, no one got reprimanded that I know of. No, I'm never going to go back there.
Today, Yoon caters dinners and works at a coffee shop to pay the bills. Catherine Miller is the vice president of Impact at the James Beard Foundation, a group that awards restaurants for great experiences. She says that progress has been slow, even after Me Too. But, she says, the fact that these problems can even be openly raised is a big change.
I think the best part of this shining the light on harassment is that we now have permission to talk about these things in a way that we never did, and we also have permission to address them. We've just got to keep talking about it. We haven't solved the problem yet.
Miller has also noticed other positive developments within the industry,
like kitchens that are open to the dining room so bad behaviors can be on display, or not drinking once the shift is over. And a lot of these changes are coming within the industry itself, from workers and restaurant owners. Serena Thompson is a Restaurant Opportunities Center's United organizer and a lifelong industry worker. She says that some restaurants are beginning to raise their minimum wage.
And it does make a difference, and it makes turnover way slower, which means you have better customer service, which means you have, higher ratings, you have a happier staff, which means better food, just like everything domino effects on itself.
I'd never in my lifetime thought that the types of things that we're talking about in this industry ever would have been talked about.
That's Preeti Mystery. She lives in California and has cooked all over the world. She's been a sous chef, an executive chef, a restaurant owner. She agrees that despite these improvements, the industry as a whole has a long way to go.
And I think that we need to look inside and start treating our employees and our customers with the same respect and reverence that we treat our vegetables and where we source our meat from and how the animals were raised.
The Restaurant Opportunities Centers United is working to organize employees in the industry. They hope to create a system of accountability and raise the minimum wage for tipped workers. There are over 600,000 restaurants in the United States. So far, 700 have signed up. Lauren Lantry, Columbia Radio News.
11 Madison Park responded that they are deeply troubled by the allegations and that they investigate and act on every complaint brought to HR or management. They said they are committed to creating a workplace where all feel welcome and respected. Today is the 147th anniversary of the first American female presidential candidate. In case you didn't know, that's Victoria Woodhull. Maddie Foley takes us back to meet her and asks what we've learned since then.
Historian Isabel Plowright and I are standing on 28th Street near Madison Square Park. Plowright points across the street.
In 1872, this would have been a large theater, would have been a very sort of busy place in New York at that time.
And now?
It is now a parking garage, or at least looks like it's heavily under construction.
There's no plaque, no statue, no trace of what happened on May 10th, 1872 at Apollo Hall, when Victoria Woodhull became the first woman presidential candidate in American history. Victoria Woodhull was born into poverty in rural Ohio. She worked as an exotic dancer and later as a traveling lecturer on spiritualism. In 1870, Woodhull and her sister became the first female brokers on Wall Street. That same year, they founded a newspaper, Woodhull and Claflin's Weekly. Sarah Hamsley Cousins teaches history at the University of Buffalo.
I mean, she does everything. She's has a finger in every different thing that's happening in this latter part of the 19th century. It's wild.
So why don't we talk about her today? Cousins suspects it's because Woodhull was just too radical. She didn't just want the right to vote. She wanted a revolution, something her fellow suffragettes weren't interested in.
She didn't play by any of the rules. She didn't even care about the rules. She was envisioning something much bigger and much more systemic. She saw a different possibility.
Cousins says Woodhull's nomination was ultimately symbolic. No one expected her to win. Woodhull couldn't even cast her own vote. But she was a woman, a suffragette, a free love supporter, a Marxist, and a business owner. In her, the Equal Rights Party saw the future. But the greater public? They saw a woman talking loudly in a space dominated by men. And they weren't too happy about that. In one cartoon from Harper's Weekly, now archived at the Museum of the City of New York, Woodhull is given horns and wings and labeled as Mrs. Satan. She holds a sign that reads, "Be saved by free love." Behind her, a ragged woman carries several babies and a drunken husband on her back as she walks up a mountain. Today, the Democratic Party alone currently has 6 female candidates running in the 2020 presidential race. But as Cousins notes, the public reaction to many of their campaigns is very, very old.
I don't know what lessons we can say that we've learned from Victoria Woodhull, because I feel like we're very much in the same place when it comes to women in politics, right? I mean, I think women in politics at any level get this kind of vitriolic response.
Ultimately, Ulysses S. Grant became the 22nd President of the United States. We aren't sure how many votes Woodhull actually got in the 1872 presidential election. On election night, Victoria Woodhull was in jail, behind bars for public indecency. Maddie Foley, Uptown Radio.
Instagram is testing a new design in Canada. The photo-sharing app has grown in popularity in part by allowing users to click like on a photo. The new design would hide the number of likes on any given post.
But those likes have become a kind of currency, giving rise to an entire industry of professional Instagrammers, or influencers. Some estimates say the influencer market industry will be worth $10 billion by 2020. Alex Coletta has more on how the new design could disrupt that industry.
An event is about to start at the Times Square Edition Hotel. A horde of stylish men and women surround the black marble bar. On the other side of the room, shelves with crystal decanters filled with whiskey. A group sits on a leather couch to the left, discussing a deal that's almost closed. It smells like money and perfume. Instagram personality Gergana Ivanova is here. As a fashion blogger, she wears a lot of different hats. No pun intended.
An influencer, blogger, there's so many different titles going around. I also do consulting, and I'm getting into fashion design.
Ivanova is based in New York and says she's been a full-time influencer for the past 2 years. Her Instagram profile, @FashionIsMyForte, has 230,000 followers. Brands like Neutrogena, Coach, and Pantene pay her to promote their products. In a recent photo, she displays a leopard print high-heeled sandal. The photo is tagged with the brand Steve Madden. It has 2,400 likes.
I pretty much spend all day, 7 days a week doing it.
The influencer market has exploded in the last few years. Ivanova says she can't disclose her rates, but the job of an influencer can be an attractive one. According to Statistica, the market size has more than doubled since 2017. Hiring influencers has become a marketing strategy for all sorts of brands, including fashion, cosmetics, travel, and more.
A lot of times it's more about awareness, because it is hard to measure directly how many pieces sold or how many people were engaged with it.
Now, measuring the success of an influencer might be even harder. That is if Instagram moves forward with its new design, which hides likes from users. The only person who can see the number of likes is the one who posted the content, which might make it more difficult for brands that partner with influencers to track the success of a post. Amy Marietta is an influencer, but she prefers the term content creator. She feels it's less pretentious. She partners with brands like Johnny Walker and the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. She's based in LA, and her account, @Amy_Marietta, has 133,000 followers. She says someone with her following can expect to make about $20,000 a month from sponsored posts, commercials, and event appearances. She says brands aren't too concerned about likes. They have other ways of getting the data they need.
I don't think that's really important to them, to be honest, because I always have to report after with a screenshot of my impressions and reach and saves just all my insights. And I think the reach is what they care more about, like how many people saw it.
Reach refers to the number of Instagram users who see a post. Impressions means the number of times one person sees a post. Instagram already has a feature where users are unable to click like. Stories, a post with a photo, video, or just text that lasts for 24 hours. Instead of likes, brands can track how many users click to their websites or profiles. But that's for brands. For new influencers, losing likes might have a bigger impact.
I think if they're not already working with brands, it could be difficult.
Instagram wants to determine how engaged users are with posts. One way to do that is measuring likes. The more engaged users are with a post, the more likely Instagram is to put that post at the top of other people's feeds. But the formula for Instagram's algorithm is a secret. Marietta, an established influencer, says that's what she struggles with most.
It's like so annoying, but basically it's the first 15 minutes, and if people are commenting more than 4 words, that shows that it's engaging, so then it's better with the algorithm.
The most important part of her job is engagement. If likes are taken away, how would Instagram's algorithm change? It's already a mystery.
There was no pressure in the beginning to post every day. That's another thing I forgot about the algorithm. You have to post every day to stay relevant, and you basically get penalized if you don't.
So if you can't take a break then?
No, not if you want your numbers to keep going well.
Sarah Stannard is a social media manager for Lafayette 148, a fashion company based in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. She hires a lot of influencers for her company's marketing campaigns. First and foremost, she looks for personalities who are a good fit for the brand and will engage a lot of users. Engagement rate determines how much interaction users are having with the content, like photos of the $1,000 leather jackets or $300 sweaters her brand makes. She says likes are only a small part of that equation, and there actually is an equation.
It's likes plus comments divided by following times 100, and that's how you get this percentage of engagement rate.
So what happens if likes are taken out of the equation? Stannard says that advertisers, brands, and markets would have to think of other solutions.
I think as a brand, you'll probably just ask influencers for more information, screenshots of their analytics or something. I just think it's going to be a little more work on both ends.
If it does become harder for influencers to grow without likes, female entrepreneurship could take a hit. Stannard says Instagram has been instrumental in empowering women in business.
It really has encouraged women specifically to kind of follow what they want to do and become entrepreneurs and start businesses because they have, they don't have to depend on investors or VCs or anything to fund something now. They have a following to be able to help to do that.
But still, Stannard says that hiding likes is a good idea for influencers and regular users. She says it would take some of the pressure off worrying about how posts are received.
People are kind of revolving their lives around likes and acceptance from other people from your phone screen, and it's not necessarily healthy. And even being involved in it, I think everybody knows that it's not how we should be living our lives.
Gergana Ivanova, the New York City influencer, agrees. She says hiding likes would give Instagram users a more genuine experience.
Maybe if likes weren't there, more people would actually follow you for you and not because someone else is following you or not because this account's famous, I have to follow it.
Instagram did not respond to a request for comment. There's been no word on how long the design test will run or whether the company plans to test it in the United States. Alex Coletta, Columbia Radio News.
Carolee Schneemann was a groundbreaking feminist performance artist. When poor health limited her ability to create art, she turned to an unusual collaborator, her cat, La Niña. The Tooth and Paw exhibition opened last night in Chelsea. It features sculptures assembled by the cat, alongside text and photos by Schneemann, who died this past March. Moira Warburton has more.
PPOW Gallery last night looked like any other art show opening. Crowds of people, drinks in plastic cups. But what's less typical about Tooth and Paw is the artist on display, La Niña, a cat. Aston Jacobs was at the opening last night. While he appreciated the art, it also got him thinking.
Yeah, maybe my cat has something coming out. I feel like I'm inspired to see what he could do. He could be in a gallery, So watch out. Watch out for it.
But La Niña is not just any cat. Annalise Biednell is the senior director of the PPOW Gallery.
There was a lot of attributes that deemed Nina to be a magical cat, but I think her activity, her communication with Carolee, and the way they were very in sync, it was just a little bit more special of a relationship.
The artist Carolee Schneemann always believed in her cat's creative abilities. Biednell wasn't so sure. Then she saw a scattered piece. It's a mustard yellow and burgundy rug with flowers, half covered in cornmeal that La Niña spilled on it. When Schneemann first saw what the cat had done, Biednell says she was confused. Then she noticed 7 blue jay feathers amongst the cornmeal.
Something about that just became magical. It was magical for Carolee, and it's resonated with me.
Ellen Winner is a professor at Boston College who studies the way we interpret art. She says the meaning in conceptual art lies not just in what it looks like, but in the thinking that led to it.
When you look at a pile of trash in a museum labeled decadence or something like that, you think about what's the artist's intention.
So she's not sure animals can be artists.
If you think it's made by a cat, you think this is completely random, and it obviously has no meaning.
Carrie Sondal is the director of the program on disability art, culture, and the humanities at the University of Illinois. To her, it's not a show of cat art. It's a work that explores a disability experience. Schneemann had always loved her cats, but her lack of mobility deepened the connection as she became dependent on her pet in a way that she'd never been before.
And so you can see this in a lot of work by people with disabilities or who experience impairment.
that their identities become extended to the people who provide care or service animals.
Sundal says asking whether La Niña had artistic intentions is missing the point. It disregards the imagination that Schneemann applied to her cat's behavior.
She has framed the material and therefore it's intentional. It is not like the cat just did something. She curated it. She framed it in terms of her relationship.
Katrina Kokoris was at Tooth and Paw the night of the opening. She didn't care that one of the artists is a cat. What appealed to her was the feeling the exhibit gave her overall.
I think it was the overarching aspect of love. It feels like a whole lot of love in that space.
That's what Biednell, the director of the gallery, takes away from the exhibit. She was close with Schneemann, and she's emotional when talking about her today.
We really see it as this kind of beautiful, last, hopeful gift from Carolee on companionship.
Tooth and Paw runs in the PPOW gallery until June 1st. Moira Warburton, Columbia Radio News.
New York City's elite public schools have come under fire for their lack of diversity. Some of those pushing for a change, including Mayor de Blasio, blame the admissions test called the SHSAT. Since 1971, it's decided which students make the cut for the city's uber-competitive specialized high schools.
But city lawmakers say their hands are tied until the state takes action. Today, State Assembly members held their first public hearing on the issue. Rebecca Ward brings us news from the proceedings.
New York City has an education problem. Controversy has arisen because there are few Black and Latino students making the cut for elite public schools. Even though the specialized schools are in New York City, the law governing the test came out of the state. So as Brooklyn College professor David Bloomfield explains,
that discretion was taken away from the city in 1971 and now is determined in Albany. That's why the Assembly is having hearings today.
Hearings that drew passionate crowds in and outside of the State Assembly hearing room in downtown Manhattan. A coalition of protesters gathered around PTA president and former Lieutenant Vito Labella, who says it's a system-wide problem. It's not a problem with the test, and to take away the test would be unfair.
We need to fix the pipeline to these great schools by offering quality, gifted, and talented education to every school in every district of this city. So that every child, irrespective of their zip code, will be prepared to compete in the global economy of the 21st century.
Nearby, State Assembly member Charles Barron held his own press scrum, presenting his bill on the subject. The bill had already passed through the State Education Committee and would eliminate the test entirely.
The test is racist, unreliable, was born out of racism, and it should be eliminated. It is unconscionable and unacceptable and unthinkable that only 7 Black students are smart enough to get into Stuyvesant High School.
It follows a similar plan to the one proposed by Mayor Bill de Blasio. It would offer spots at specialized high schools to the top 7% of students at every middle school. Supporters of Barron's bill feel the standardized test does a poor job of determining how students will later perform, a view represented at the State Assembly hearing by New York City's Deputy Chancellor of Education, Josh Wallach.
I think what we believe is that the specialized high school exam being one single measure doesn't really give us a good picture of doesn't give us the best picture of who can and who can't succeed in a specialized high school.
Jermaine Williams, New York City's public advocate, disagrees. He thinks it would be unfair to do away with the test entirely.
For the life of me, I do not understand why we have to take away one access point to provide another. And in the terms of leadership, providing 2 pathways access points lets all students show that they have the ability to excel in these schools without pitting communities needlessly against each other.
The state bill doing away with the test is currently in committee. Further hearings on the legislation have not yet been announced. Rebecca Ward, Columbia Radio News.
In another one of our commentaries, reporter Andrea Salcedo explores how her parents' divorce shaped her view of love.
When I was 15 years old, my dad asked me to come to his office. It was full of building maps and plans on a glass table. He's an architect. It was a weird request. It was the weekend and the office was empty. He looked me in the eyes and told me he and my mom were getting a divorce. I was shocked. They seemed fine. We had annual vacations to Disney, New Year's at the beach, and trips to the countryside of my home country, Panama. I still remember being in the middle seat of my dad's car, peeking my head between him and my mother sitting in the front. My younger brother beside me on our way to school every day. We were a family of 4, and this made me proud. My parents had been married for 18 years, and although the relationship was not perfect, I had always thought I was very lucky to have them together. That day, my dad admitted he had cheated on my mom 3 times. He said my mom cheated once. My dad said he had tried everything he could, but that my mom would not change her mind. But even if my dad had cheated, on that day I took a side. My dad's. From that day on, we were never a family of 4 again. A couple of months later, my parents sold our beautiful terracotta 2-story house. I moved with my brother and mother to an okay apartment a couple of blocks away from school. My dad to a different apartment. I knew my dad had cheated on my mom, but in my mind, he was the good guy. It was my mom who broke up our family. My parents went from being there for every birthday or holiday to communicating only via email. I spent many Christmas and birthdays away from my dad. He refused to show up if my mother was present. They'd betrayed each other a somewhat even number of times. Why couldn't my mom just forgive him? We fought a lot. Sometimes I went days without speaking to her. I'd skip dinner or lunch if she was at the table. I said very hurtful and mean things to her that I would later regret. I told her she was the worst mom ever, that she was selfish, and that she did not put her kids' happiness before hers. 3 years later, I had my first boyfriend. He was a bad boy. We dated for almost 8 months. But one night, when he drove me home, he parked his black Jeep in my building's garage. Things had been weird. He would not text me as often and reply with dry sentences, sometimes a couple of words. When we were together, things felt awkward and distant. This time, I did see it coming. He didn't even look me in the eyes. He said, "I've been seeing and texting my ex. I think we should end things here. You're not fun. You're too boring for me. I don't think this is going to work." I still remember the red clock he gave me as a birthday present. It would jump and roll across my bedroom floor with loud music. That night, I threw it down from my 19th floor window with all of my strength. Man, your first breakup hurts, especially when the guy is a complete jerk. I cried myself to sleep listening to sad songs. The next day over lunch, I told my mom what happened. No matter how many grudges I had, I still needed her. She looked me in the eyes and said she was sorry, but that I deserved someone who would respect me and love me for who I was. Tears started to fall down my cheeks. When my parents first broke up, my mom didn't really say much about it. She told me someday I'd understand. Finally, I did. My mom was setting an example for me. That's love. It's about self-respect and how to stand up for yourself and your family.
For a photo of Andrea's family, head to uptownradio.com.
That does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Maggie Green. Senior producer Stephanie Horton led our team of reporters.
Ali Swenson coordinated our studio production with Cynthia Bettabiza and Alex Coletta.
Our web team, Sachi McClendon, got the stream live to the web. Lauren Lantry and Shannon Lynn produced the news. Senior editor Camille Peterson and assistant editor Bianca Jacobone led our copy team.
Our instructors Joanne Farian, Sally Herships and Ben Shapiro advised our staff along with Acacia O'Connor. I'm Safira Ahmadi.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. For all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.